So I'm recording now, so it starts. But that's okay. It was just me talking, so it doesn't matter. So I'm opening Rhino and I'm just going to show you where to go to UVW map your projects in Rhino. And so I would just go through this step because I think it's going to, for let's call it 85% of the cases, this method will probably be enough for you to get most of your materials looking okay. And then in Unreal, you can tweak things as you need to if they don't look okay, right? So in Rhino, right, here's my Villa Savoie project. I can just grab the whole thing. And I'm just going to go to my properties. Has anyone done this before? UVW maps. Do you guys know what this section is, right? Like this texture mapping. Yeah. Is this familiar to any of you? And so all I'm going to do is apply a box map to the entire scene, right? Assuming that most of the time architecture is pretty boxy, right? You know, when I was a student, everyone's doing blobs, so this one, right? But that's passe, right? Now we do squares the way we should have always, right? And so we can just apply a cube map, and you can put it anywhere you want to. It doesn't matter. And I just need to say how big this thing is, right? You'll see, and I'll show you in a second, that all of these textures that you download will tell you what dimension that image is, right? A lot of the times it's 2 meters by 2 meters, right? Sometimes it's 1 meter by 1 meter. So I'm just going to type 2M for 2 meters. And then just keep checking to make it a 2 meter by 2 meter by 2 meter cube. And then done. Right? So every highlighted asset now has a box map of 2 meter by 2 meter by 2 meter. That's going to start tiling from that point that I had designated. And so when I bring this model into Unreal using Datasmith or just as an FBX, it'll have that UV embedded in that asset. Okay. So how did you bring your projects into Unreal? Did you use Datasmith or did you just bring in a model that you found? Datasmith. So models that you find. Did I not even open? Right. So let's open Chrome. Oh yeah. Everyone wants you to sign up. Okay, so let's just go to Sketchfab. And I'm pretty sure this is where I found my Villa Savoie. In fact, that was there, but let's just. Right, so I think this was the model that I grabbed. Right. And so everywhere you have, everywhere you download like assets like this, like Sketchfab or TurboSquid or Fab, if you look at the information here, it's going to tell you whether there is a UV layer or not, right? You can see here it says UV layer, yes. So basically what I just did ruined that UV layer, right? Because UVs were already set on that geometry, meaning that the geometry, the person who created this asset modeled everything so that the textures appeared appropriately for the 3D surfaces. Okay, so don't just apply this if you don't have to, right? This is more for if you're making your own Rhino model in Studio and you want to bring it into Unreal, it might make sense to put a cube map on everything at a very at the basic, at the very minimum, right? So when you bring it into Unreal and you apply brick, it's gonna look like brick and not be all stretched out. Okay, so when you download assets, it might be helpful to see if the UVs are already set or not, right? If you're making your own assets, again, apply some kind of a map to your surfaces. It's going to make it a lot easier for you to apply materials. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, hopefully that just is something you'll remember to do. Because we haven't really been making our own models in this class, right? So everyone have the model open? Okay. I think now if you guys go into the week 5 folder, I want you guys to copy this onto your C drive, the Villa Savoie 4 model, Yale VR 4. It's under the week 5 folder. You can copy the whole week 5 folder onto your C drive if you want to. We're basically going to create this, so you don't really need it, but if you don't follow along, you may want to download that later. Okay. Oh wait, it's not done. Sorry, don't do that. It said 10 minutes ago, so it's not quite done yet. So maybe in another 10 minutes. Sorry. Cancel. But is everyone in the arc viz template? They have it open. Okay. So let's create just real quick, I'll show you something about the ArcViz template. The ArcViz template does have a kind of true to life sun system built into it. So if you want to just type in your latitude and longitude and time zone, and you could rotate your north arrow to wherever your model is set. This has that functionality built into it. If you want this, it's called the sun sky. If you want that in your scene, all you have to do is migrate it into your scene and just drag the sun sky into your scene as well. Okay, but just wanted to point that out there. And I think that some of the settings in the ArcViz template are kind of optimized for visuals, but again, all of these things you can control yourself, right? So we're going to create a new material in this project. I'm just going to right click and create a folder called materials. I'm going to double click on that, right click and create material, right? And I'm just calling it m_planet, right? Because we're going to make little planets or a little planet with the possibility of making more planets, right? So remember what I was saying last week about materials versus material instances? Can anybody tell me in as few words as possible what that means? What's a material versus a material instance? And remember, I was using the emissive material last week to show that.
The material is essentially the base.
Yeah.
Instead where the instance you can change whatever you tell it to.
Yes.
Whether it's a color or right.
Yes. And what do I use to make those changes? No. It's like a variable, right?
Yeah.
But we call that a parameter in shaders, right? So anytime you hear the word parameter, it means it's something that I can control, right? It's like parametric modeling, right? Parametric modeling means I just have rules that I can start moving sliders around, and the results of that are different, but the rules are always the same. The rules I'm applying are the same. The results are different because I could change certain parameters, right? So in the material world, we use parameters in our master material so that we can create instances of that material and start making functional changes to it without having to recreate materials over and over again, right? So essentially, we're using one program to create multiple materials of the same, let's call it like a family, right? They're all similar because they all perform the same way, but they could look different wherever we turn them into parameters, right? So here we have our material, and I can double click on it, and we can see that we have this result node, right? Which just accepts a bunch of channels, right? And then last week I did an unlit material, right? Which is like the most basic material there is. All the unlit material does is it accepts a color, right? Which we can bump up past one to make it actually emit light, right? If we make an emissive material negative with a negative value, it actually absorbs light from this, which is kind of crazy to think about, right? It's like Vanta black or whatever that is, right? Except it actually, it's like a black hole. Actually, that's what it is. It's a black hole. But today we're not going to be doing the unlit material. We're going to do a default lit material, right? Which means it does receive light information, which means it has to be shaded like it receives light information, right? And these are the channels we have to work with. Base color, metallic, specular, roughness, anisotropy, whatever that means. I've never used it. Emissive color, normal, tangent, world position offset, ambient occlusion, right? These, you'll start to see these when you download materials or when you download textures, right? So a great place you might want to look for textures is Polygon. It used to be textures.com, but now you have to pay for it, I think. But Polygon is free. And so we can go to textures, right? Okay, here's brick. We've been talking a lot about brick. So I want this brick texture, and I've got all of these brick textures available to me, right? And it tells me, okay, what's the physical site? This one is 2.5 by 2.5 meters. So you might have to do a little bit of math and adjust your UVW map, for instance, right? But it always tells you what the size is so you can make it true to life, right? It tells me there are 7 texture files, right? And so what are the texture files? Oh, here they are. So this should all sound familiar. Base color, ambient occlusion, displacement, metallic, normal. ORM is a combination of multiple channels, and roughness, right? ORM is O for ambient occlusion, R for roughness, M for metallic, right? It's just using a vector to store 3 floats, right? Remember, a vector is just X, Y, and Z, or R, G, and B.
What if like multiple material in the projects have different sites?
They 100% can, and you just have to control for that, right? So if you make everything one UV, like a one cube map, and you have something that's like round or something like that, you may have to go find that material and change the UV, or you may have to create another instance of the same material and adjust the UVs in Unreal to make it look right. Okay, but these are very, you'll see these all the time whenever you download textures. All right. So that's what these are. And maybe what we'll do for everyone go to Polygon. Actually, let me do this instead. This I can send you hopefully much faster. Yeah. So I'm gonna copy. Okay. So I've downloaded, just because I think you may still have to log into this, which we don't have time to do. But you can create a login and find a bunch of textures if you want to. In the M drive, I just dropped in this textures folder, and we've got some cracked mud, right? So go ahead and download that. I'm just going to type cracked mud here. I think I got it from this site, right? It's something like this. I think it was this one. Heavily cracked mud, right? This one's 3 meters by 3 meters.
Where is it?
It's in the M drive, week 5 textures. And there's some other textures too. If you want to use cobblestone, that's fine. This is the zip file of that, right? And so we're going to use these textures in our project. So I actually need to drag them into our project. Right, so I'm going to right click, create another folder. I'm going to call this folder textures. It's in my material folder. And I'm going to go and grab these. I'm just going to grab the JPEGs because I don't need TIFF. And I'm just going to drag it in. And so I'm going to grab all of these and I'm just going to drag them into my material. Oops. Right? And we got a bunch of textures now in our scene. And we just kind of have to sort through them. Right? Normal is the easiest one. It always looks kind of like this blue, purpley color, right? And when we connect our normal map, we can sort of now see what happened to our material, right? So it's like giving me some cracked muddiness, right? And the way a normal map works is it doesn't change my geometry. So remember when we were doing the landscapes and using the nanite tessellation, you guys remember that? Does that sound familiar? And we were actually changing the geometry of our surface. A normal map doesn't actually change the geometry of the surface. It just changes the way light bounces off the surface so that it looks like there's cracked muddiness. Does that make sense? Right? It's just a trick of the computer, right? If we look at our wireframe, right, our sphere is still quite smooth, right? So there's no change to the geometry, right? Now let's connect the rest of this, right? So this one has color information. If we hover over this, this is going to tell me COL for color, right? You just kind of have to use your deductive reasoning because people name these things in a variety of ways. So now I attach that to my base color, and then there's the color information overlaid and aligned nicely with my normal map information. So now it starts to look like I have cracked mud, right? But let's just keep attaching these things. Here's my next. This says bump map. I'm not sure what we'll do with that yet because it doesn't align directly with what we have here. This one is my AO, which is for ambient occlusion, right? So I can move that over and connect it to my ambient occlusion. And I'm just going to move this over there. This one is my displacement, right? So displacement and bump are kind of similar, so I'm going to hold them there for a second. Here's cracked mud gloss. And here is cracked mud reflectance or reflect, right? So we have some interpretation that we need to do, right? So metallic, specular, and roughness are various names that describe specularity or reflectivity, right? Roughness is the opposite of reflective, right? So if something is 100% rough, it means it's not going to reflect any information at all. If it's 0% rough, it means it's been polished to a mirror shine and it's going to reflect everything, right? Specular is kind of the opposite of that, right? 100% specularity means it's going to reflect everything, and 0 specularity means it's not going to reflect anything at all. Metallic is like trying to mimic the properties of metal, which have something to do with specularity, but not in the same way as specular or roughness, right? That's all we really need to know. So when you have a metal material that you're downloading from Fab or Polygon or wherever, you'll probably get a metallic map that you'll connect to this particular channel, okay? A bump map and a displacement map are a little bit different from one another. A displacement map is what we would use, say, when we're using a nanite texture to get information about the change in Z. Remember when in Rhino I did the Z buffer and we could see black and white information, and black means low and white means high, right? So that's what the displacement map is going to do. And this is what's going to be the closest to our world position offset, right? So I can connect that. And now this is actually, or should be, changing my geometry. So let's just see if that's working or not. My wireframe. Doesn't look like it's doing much, right? But I might need to pump that value up if I want to have more of an effect. A bump map is really more about like the fine details of texture on a surface, right? In this case, we're not really gonna use it. We can maybe combine our bump map with our displacement map if we wanted to, but we don't have a separate spot for our bump map, so we're just gonna leave it off. In fact, I'm just gonna delete it. We don't need it, right? And so for all intents and purposes, now we have this material and it's ready to go. I can just apply this to my surface. Let's apply and save first, right? And so now when we go down, I'm going to slow down my camera a bit, right? And I hit Control L. I can't do anything because of this sun sky actor. So instead, I'm just going to change my time to my sun, right? So if I start to get really low, you can kind of see like the normal map picking up the light and making that mud texture look a little bit more realistic. Okay. What was this one? Oh, gloss. So gloss we'll put in specular. And this was reflectivity, right? So you know what? I'm going to put reflectivity in specular. And I'm just going to dump this. Okay. So if you ever want to know what any part of your material graph is going to look like, you can always select on it, right click, and start previewing. So instead of looking at the material as a whole, we can look at any particular part of our kind of chain of events to see what that looks like. And when we're happy with whatever we're looking at, we can stop previewing, and then it'll show the results of the material nodes all together. Okay. So if you're downloading materials, this is probably the extent of what you need to do. Or if you're downloading textures, I should say, this is the extent of what you would need to do. And then your material would be ready to go, right? And you could just apply it to whatever surface you want, right? The other thing you could do, I'm going to just save and close this for a moment, right? I can right click on this and I can make this a material instance, right? And I'll just call this Polygon. So like if I download more textures from Polygon, I could just re-import the textures and use this as a parent material and just apply the textures directly to this instance, right? But right now we don't have anything to do here, right? We've got some embedded functionality that Unreal provides us with, but I can't actually insert my textures here, right? I can't do that until I set these up as parameters. So remember, in the instance level, material instance level, we have to turn everything into a parameter. So if I right click on my texture, I can convert this to a parameter, right? And I'm just going to call it based on the channel that I have, right? So I'm going to put base color, right?
This is the instance of the original.
This is the original material. So anytime we see this graph, it's the original material. So I'm converting all of these now into a parameter. Remember, in Polygon, it called it reflectance. And so to remind myself which channel or which texture I'm using, I'm just going to use the Polygon names for it, right? This is displacement. So right click, convert to parameter, displacement, right? This is definitely a normal, right click, convert to parameter, normal, right click, convert to parameter, ambient occlusion, right? So now I'm going to hit save, right? Now I have some parameters available to me to check, to turn on, and then I could replace this with whatever other texture I want to use, right? So if I go back into my main menu, if I go into my textures, I'm going to right click and do cracked mud. I'm going to drag all of these things into my cracked mud folder, and I'm going to move it here instead of copying it. I'm going to right click, create another folder, and I can't remember what the other one was, maybe stone, right? So if I go in here now, I'm going to put this in a stone folder. I'm going to open this and unpack it. Extract. Sure. Right now, if I double click on it, I've got these other textures, right? I'm going to open this folder now, and I'm going to drag all of these textures in. I just need the JPEG files, right? So if I go back to my material, right, I'm going to right click. I'm going to rename this to MI for material instance underscore cracked mud. Doesn't like spaces, cracked mud. And I'm just going to duplicate this. Or I can just right click on my master material and create another material instance. Either way works. MI underscore stone. Right? So now I have two material instances based on the same master material. I'm going to double click on that. And now this doesn't look like stone to me, so I got to do something about it, right? So I'm going to take this, undock it so I can access my other textures, right? So this is my color. So I'm going to drag that into my color. This is my oops, that was the wrong one. This is my ambient occlusion. Put that in the right place. So color goes into base color. This is metallic. This is roughness. So neither of which I have, right? So then my master material doesn't offer me enough slots. So I'm going to just go ahead and add a couple texture parameters. Texture sample parameter 2D. I'm going to call this metallic. Control C, Control V. And I'm just going to rename it over here on the parameter name on the left. I'm going to call it roughness. And I'm going to connect metallic to metallic, roughness to roughness. I'm going to save it.
If it's just white, it doesn't do it.
Over here, I could just turn it off.
Oh,
Right. So I'm going to turn off displace. Actually, I may have to clear it. So I'm going to clear my displacement. And I'm going to clear my normal. I'm going to clear my reflectance. I'm going to turn on my metallic and roughness. Oh, wait, I did the wrong one, didn't I? Sorry. I'm going to just close this one. I want to open my stone material. Right, so I'm going to clear this one. Anything that says cracked mud, I'll just clear for now. Because if I don't have clear, clear, and clear. And then in my textures, I added my ambient occlusion, I added that, so metallic goes into metallic. And this is my roughness, goes into roughness, right? So here's my cobblestone. Right. So the advantageous of the advantage of this method is it's similar to like when we were placing foliage, right? Using material instances means it's using one shader to create multiple materials, right? If we kept adding that same shader back into our scene, then our GPU has to calculate all those shaders over and over. And so there is a performance benefit to using master materials and instances. Most of the time, if you're using only instances, you're much better off. Okay, so I would encourage you to get into this practice when you're creating materials. All right. So that's like the basic workflow. But let's say we want to do something a bit more custom, right? When you create a new shader, right? I'm going to hit Alt to uncheck some of these. Right? I just want to keep let's just keep the normal and the base color, right? All this other stuff I probably won't need, but I'll keep him here just in case. Right? So you can see like my cracked mud looks a little bit shiny. That's not right, right? But we want to create something a bit more custom, right? And I'm choosing a planet just because it gives me some criteria to look, right? So establish some objectives of why you're creating a material, and then we'll use the shader and the layering that we can do within the shader channels in order to make that, right? So a planet needs terrain, right? It needs, like I'm thinking the Earth has an ocean, has water, it has an atmosphere or cloud, right? So let's say these are three things that I want, and I want to do it without having to then paint a picture of a planet and wrap it around my sphere. I'm just going to use code to create my planet, okay? And so the cracked mud is giving me terrain, right? And we can use the rocky surface or the cobblestone or whatever. It doesn't really matter. We want some sort of texture to create a terrain out of, right? We also want to be able to control the appearance of that texture, right? So I'm going to right click on here and get a texture coordinate node. So I started typing coordinate to get this texture coordinate node, right? And what this texture coordinate node allows me to do is it allows me to change the tiling of my material. Well, first, I got to connect it, right? And so now if I change this number, right, I can tile it in a very different way, right? But now my texture is not aligning to my normal map. So I want to make sure that this is affecting both of my UV channels, right? So now you can see I tiled it in this weird way and my texture starts to look weird, right? So I can change the amount of tiling that occurs, right? And if we're just using PBR materials and we know it's 2 meters by 2 meters, then we're just gonna keep it at 1 as long as our UV box map also aligns to that, right? But this is how we can adjust the 2 meter to 3 meter discrepancy, right? So I want a texture coordinate node. And actually between that, I want something called a panner, right? And then I'm going to connect from my panner into my UVs, right? So I'm thinking of the Earth rotates, right? And rather than rotating the material, I'm just going to move my texture a little bit. So if I type 0.2 in the X and 0.2 in the Y, I can have the shader just move my texture, right? So it looks like it's rotating, but if we look at it flatly, right? It's just my texture moving in the X and the Y axis, right? So a panner is a node that allows me to, effectively have a time function to a texture so I can move that around, right? So I want to be able to add that because I think planets rotate, so I want some functionality there, right? And so for the most part, this is the Earth or terrain part of my planet, right? So let's work on the atmosphere, right? So we have the base color and the normal map working for the terrain. I could probably find an image of a layer of clouds and overlay it on top of my cracked earth texture to make it look like clouds. But I also have other channels that I can use. So I'm going to use the emissive channel to layer on some clouds onto my scene. And rather than going online and looking for like an image of a cloud that's already tiled, which might be hard to do, I'm going to use something called a noise. Right? So I'm just typing noise, right click, type noise, right? We have different types of noise. We can do pick whatever type of noise we want. If we want to see what this looks like, I'm just going to right click and start previewing this node, right? So we can see noise is just noise, right? It's like when you're flipping through channels that don't have a signal, the TV just kind of is like shh, like that's noise, right? And so I want to use noise, which is essentially computer generated randomness, to use as my clouds, right? But obviously this doesn't look like clouds, right? If we change, so I'm going to right click, just follow along and we'll explain all this later. We're going to get absolute, actually type world and get world position. Right? I'm going to right click. I'm going to do some math. I'm going to divide. Right? So one thing to keep in mind is textures that are black and white is just ones and zeros and any value in between, right? A texture looks like something because our brains, if you follow Gestalt theory, like we want to make a whole picture out of something, right? For the computer, the texture is pixel with a value, pixel with a value, pixel with a value, pixel with a value. And they're usually black and white, which means each pixel has a value between 0 and 1. Okay, so we can use a lot of math to adjust and change things in our scene, right? So my noise, for instance, is way too dense. So I can make that noise look bigger by dividing it by a bigger number, right? So I'm going to divide my world position, which means I need a starting point. And I'm going to create a parameter. So I'm going to type scalar, and I want a scalar parameter, right? And I'm just going to call this cloud size, right? And I'm going to give the default value of 1 because anything divided by 1 is anything, right? X divided by 1 is X, right? So my default value, it doesn't matter what you set it to, but I set it at 1 for that purpose, right? And my clouds are operating on the surface level of my texture, right? And I want to do something else with my noise on the Z level, right? That makes sense, right? So if you think about a displacement map, the black and white information is either pushing or pulling my surface and giving it geometry, right? And that's operating on the Z channel, which is the vertical channel, right? So I want the appearance of my clouds to be on the X and Y, and I want the sort of height of my clouds, my atmosphere shouldn't be on the terrain. I want it to sort of pop up. So I'm going to use the Z channel for that. And I'm using the world position in order to use that, to do that, right? I also want my clouds to move. So I'm going to drag from the X, Y, and I want another panner, right? I'm going to use something called append. Whoops. Append vector, right? So here we're splitting off X and Y from Z. And so somewhere else, we got to bring it back together again. And that's what append does. Okay. I know this is all kind of Greek to you, but just bear with me. And so I'm going to connect this to the B. I'm going to connect the Z. And then I'm going to take all of this information and bring it into my divide node, right? So that I can change the size of my cloud. So if I divide by a bigger number, say 5, you can see the density of my texture just changed. If I set it to 50, right? The density changes again.
What kind of noise? What's the cloud size?
What kind of noise?
No,
No, wait, sorry, what?
like what is the cloud size?
So the cloud size is just a number that's dividing my map. So all of those ones and zeros, or it's really dividing the tiling of my noise. So what the divide is essentially allowing me to do is zoom into that noise so that I'm seeing it in more detail. Right? I can't do this with a 2D image because the more I zoom in, the more pixelated or less information there is. But the noise is kind of infinite in this way, right? So if I divided it by a bigger number, I'm zooming in closer and closer. And if we look at the way noise looks kind of like a cloud. So I sort of picked that on purpose. Right? And so now I can apply this to my emissive color or my emissive channel. I could stop previewing it. And if I go back to my sphere, I sort of have clouds floating above my filling, right? So I'm just layering these maps on top of one another.
So how did it know to put the clouds above, not under the texture?
It's just like,
Whatever comes first.
I mean, I don't know if emissive comes first or if they're multiplying or adding. That's a good question. I don't know why.
But it works.
But it works. I mean, the other way I could have done it is I could have, say, taken the RGB from my base color and did an addition. And then I add my clouds to that. Instead of using the emissive channel, I could just sort of make an additive layer, right? But it's different. I'm getting the normal information. So I would need to add or somehow extract normal away from it, right? And so the reason I'm using the emissive is it's not receiving all of that light information. So it's not going to interact with the normal map, right? And then, you know, these clouds don't look detached from it, right? I couldn't multiply because anything multiplied by 1 is just the thing itself. So I wouldn't actually benefit from a multiply layer, right? And so, yeah, I'm not quite sure if emissive comes above, but for our purposes, it does, right? And so I want my clouds to move so I can also do my panner, except now I divided it by such a big number, I actually need to bump up my values here in order to make that work. So let's do 2 and 2. And you can see the clouds are starting to move, right?
That's not panning though.
It's panning a noise, which means it's changing the noise is like it's like a math function. So it kind of works like it's like a random function, right? So it does in this case, if it were a 2D image, it would just move across. In this case, the noise is responding to the move as well.
That has some type of like consistency.
Yeah. Right. So here's our planet. But I want the clouds to kind of sit above the surface. So I want to play with my world position offset in order to do that, right? So I'm going to take my cloud information, I just want the clouds to pop up, not the rest of my planet, right? So I'm gonna drag from here. And I'm gonna type clamp. And then I'm gonna multiply. Right? So what clamp does is it just gives me a 0 to 1 value, which I may not actually need the clamp, but it doesn't really matter. But I want to be able to control how much my displacement occurs. So I'm going to use another scalar parameter. So I'm going to type scalar again and get a scalar parameter. And I'm going to call this cloud height. Right? For now, I'm just going to call it, leave it at 1, right? Anything multiplied by 1 is the thing itself, right? And I'm going to connect it to my world position offset, right? So now if I change this value to 10, you can start to see that the noise is interacting with my geometry, right? This doesn't look right. So I want it to be much more subtle. So let's call this 2, right? And so it's doing some weird stuff, but there it is. Right? So now if I look at my wireframe, we can start to see that the world position offset is changing the physical geometry of my sphere, or the geometry of my sphere. I shouldn't say physical. Right? The other thing is the more dense my geometry is. So if I had like a million polygons on that sphere, the offset will align more precisely to the noise. Does that make sense? Right? Because all the computer has is a pattern to follow, like a mask, and points on a grid to manipulate. So if my pattern does not align with my point, there is a little bit of a discrepancy there, right? So the more points I have, the more accurate the displacement becomes. Okay. Right. So here's our little planet. I'm going to pan. See, 0.1 minus 0.1. Whoa, that's too fast.
0.0.
Minus 0.001, 0.001. It's like going in the opposite direction. So let's try negative number here. And a positive number here, or do they both need to be positive? Maybe they both need to be positive. Right. Right. And then I could start changing all of these parameters. I could do it here, but ideally what I'm doing is saving this. Right. I'm going to go to my basic shapes. You can see this is all already kind of responding to that material, right? It's like shaking like jello. I'm just gonna clear this out. Right. And so in my materials, right, I just kind of ruined my master material. I should have created another one. But I'm just gonna grab my cracked mud planet here. I wonder why my noise isn't showing up.
Where's the cloud?
I don't know. right? But I mean, this particular material is not meant to reside in the unreal scene. It's just going to reside in here, right? So let's go back to our planet. What was the other thing I wanted? I wanted the ocean, right? And I can make my ocean changeable because I like to have the option, right? So I'm just going to type parameter, right? And instead of a scalar parameter, I'm going to use a vector parameter, right? The difference is a scalar parameter is just one number, a vector parameter is three numbers, right? And that three numbered parameter is collectively can be read as a color, right? So for R, G, and B, right? So I'm going to call this ocean color, right? And now, because I've already used my emissive channel, I want my ocean color. Let's just make it a color so it's not black. I'm gonna make it pink. You can make it blue. Totally fine, right? I'm actually gonna use, right? So let's preview this, right? I'm actually gonna use my displacement from the cracked mud to define where the oceans are. So I want the ocean to be in the deeper parts and not on the upper part. So, you know, this is terrain and the darker areas are ocean, right? And I want to use this mask or this map or this texture to define that, right? So again, this is just black and white information. If it's black, I want it to be pink. If it's white, I want it to be mud, right? So that's what I'm trying to tell the computer to do.
Is that the Indian? Which section?
This is the displacement map. So I'm going to stop previewing. Whoops. I'm going to stop previewing this node. And so I need to filter between these two using this as my filter. Does that make sense? Right? And so the way we can do that is with something called linear interpolate or lerp. So I'm going to create a lerp node. And for the time being, I'm going to just disconnect my normal map so it doesn't get in my way, right? So I'm going to hit Alt and just disconnect the normal, right? So I want a mix between mud and ocean for my base color, right? Right now it's doing 50-50, right? So it's either A or B, depending on a condition. In this case, 0.5 means give me half of A, give me half of B, and then use that as my base color, right? So that's like 0.5 on every pixel or a flat gray image, right? But if I apply my displacement map as my alpha channel, it's going to do something a little bit different. So I'm going to turn off my emissive as well so I can get my clouds out of the way. And we'll turn that back on later, right? And we could see it's doing some funny things, right? Because for one, our panner is moving. So I'm going to turn that off, right? So that our texture's aligned, right? So it's still putting pink on my surface because this image isn't contrasted enough to give me the effect that I'm looking for, which is just like a pink river with muddy terrain on top of it, right? And so we have to do a few things to our displacement map here, right? The other thing is, I can't tell, but it seems to be putting the pink on the mud and not in the cracks like I want it to, right? So I need to invert this image. And if I right click and type 1 minus is a node that will, invert the black and white information, right? So now we can see that the pink is much deeper in the cracks, but it's still appearing on the terrain, which I don't want, right? So we need to do something with this texture. We need to add some contrast to it, right? And the way we add contrast to a texture, this is how Photoshop works, this is how all software works, is we have to add a power component to it, right? So an exponent, right? So if I right click and I do some more math, I need a power. So I need this image raised by a power of something, right? And so I'm just going to call this ocean intensity, right? And we'll set this, and then we'll connect this to the alpha now, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm increasing the contrast. And so if I increase it by a power of 10, right? If I preview this now, right? I'm previewing all of the preceding elements. So if I start previewing this node, you can see I'm increasing the contrast of my image. If I change this to 100, right? It's a little bit extreme. I need my black and white information, right? Let's try 50, right? And then stop previewing. This is not exactly what I want, right? So let's go back to 10 and let's do a little bit more math. So I want to take the power of that and then I want to round it. So rounding is either rounding up or rounding down. So I'm getting even more contrast information. Hey guys, can you follow along? So now if I preview this, right? And I reduce this a little bit, I'm starting to get a bit more of that black and white texture that I'm trying to get, that I'm after. Let's try 3, right? So now if I stop previewing, I'm starting to get what appears to be more like what an ocean would look like on the surface of a planet.
What rounding is doing is making it either black or white.
Yeah. So it's if it's more than a half, it's going to round up. If it's less than a half, it's going to round down. Okay. And so I just need to then copy this. I need another lerp because I also want this to work with my normal map as well. Because I don't want there to be normal information where the ocean is located. So I also want my ocean to shine. So I can connect this to roughness. Actually, I'm going to delete this. I'm just going to use the normal map as is. Actually. Why is this giving me like a weird pattern on it? And I might need to invert the rounding. So again, 1 minus. And so my ocean is a little bit more reflective. like the surface of water or something like that. So let's add the clouds back. All right. So here's my planet with the ocean, the terrain, and an atmosphere. And it rotates. Right. So in other words, have a goal when you create a material, or only create a material if you have a goal. If the goal is to make it look like something, you could probably find that material. But if there's something very specific that you want to do, you can start using these channels to mix it, right? And so like an architectural application of this might be like, if I have a tiled material and I want to make it look dingy, I can use the grout lines to then apply like, you know, some kind of a dirt material or like, and then use these maps to then create that textures. That make sense? Okay. So there's our planet. Oh my God.
Just quickly, what did we disconnect for? Get rid of the clouds?
I just disconnected the
It's
emissives.
a color with,
Alt and click.
no, what is it connected?
Oh, it's connected to
The clamp.
the clamp, yeah. I think you could just
Oh, yeah,
connect
yeah.
it directly from here. I think this would work too.
Is there a way to save a material so I can plug it into another project with script?
Yeah, so if you go and right click, you can migrate
Yeah.
this into your project. Right. So I actually don't know why my clouds aren't appearing on this, but they're not. But if we wireframe this, so I just want to show you guys this sphere, the one that Unreal gives you, is actually less dense even than the preview sphere, right? And so that sphere has even less information. If I wanted to make this planet look really good, I would maybe get like a very dense sphere mesh, and then that'll align better to the noise when it does the displacement. Okay. So this is not done yet. So let's do another thing here. Okay. So I'm going to content. I'm going to right click. I'm going to create a new level. I'm going to call it L underscore light shaft. Right. So everyone create a new level, double click on it. It's going to ask you to save the old level, do so. Right. And so again, there's nothing, right? So the first thing I would do is go into my window, go to my environment light mixer. I'm going to create a skylight, create an atmospheric light. I want some clouds, and I want a height fog. Right? I just checked everything basically. Right? So now I have an atmosphere. It's a very clear day, I guess. Strange that, oh, there they are. Right? So now if I do Control L, now I can, move my sun, create some dramatic lighting, et cetera, right? I'm going to create a quick landscape. So in the selection mode, landscape, right? I don't need a big landscape. So I'm just gonna do 7 by 7. And create. Right? I'm gonna just kind of raise the edges a little bit. Basically, I want to be inside of a little ball. And then hold shift to lower. Okay. And then I'm just gonna go back to my selection mode. Right, so I didn't do a great job here, but you get the idea. Right, if I want, I can quickly add a third person character. So I'm gonna go to add feature or content pack. I'm just gonna add a the third person template to my project, just so I have a scale figure basically. Right, so now in my third person blueprint, I can drag this character into my scene. Right, I can go to auto possess. Where did that go? Is it? I'm gonna put possess. I don't think that's it. Yeah, auto possess player 0. Right. So now I'm gonna possess this player when I play. Right. So when I hit play, here I am, and I could walk around my landscape. Okay. I want some terrain on this surface, so I'm just gonna go to my materials. I'm just gonna get my cracked mud. I'm just gonna drag the cracked mud onto my ground plane. Just the texture, not the one that I just made. It's not letting me do that. I'm gonna select my landscape. Let's see if I can just drag it on. So what happens is if I drag a texture onto a surface, it's not letting me do it for landscape, right? So I'm just gonna really quickly create a material and mud. Double click on that. I'm just gonna drag the base color just so I have something on my ground surface. This isn't super important. I'm gonna set my roughness to 1 so it doesn't reflect. And save. Right? So now I can drag this onto my landscape material. And so I just want a ground surface, right? It doesn't look great, but I just need something there. I'm gonna grab some cubes. Right? If I alt and drag, I can copy. Right? I'm just kind of gonna build out some walls here. And then alt and drag. Gonna create like a ceiling. I'm gonna alt and drag. Right. So let's just create like a Church of the Light kind of situation. Right. And so if I do Control L, I can move my sun around. Where do I want it? Where do I want it? Something like that, right? You can see a little lens flare happening, right? One thing we really want in our scenes, so we talked about this a little bit, a post-process volume, right? Just gives me visual controls, right? It's almost like Photoshop layers in my scene. I want this to affect my entire scene. So if I go to infinite extents unbound, now my post-process volume affects the entirety of my scene, right? And so in my post-process volume, I can add things, if you recall, like bloom, right? So if I'm in this and I want it to glow a little bit more, I can kind of pump up these values. That doesn't seem to be doing much, right? I've got some lens flare already, but there's also lens flare in here. I'm going to control my exposure. So in my exposure, I'm going to go to metering mode and I'm going to do manual. And just raise this up to something more reasonable.
What's that box? We just put it.
The post-process volume, right? So this volume, when I apply it to my entire scene, allows me to control for these things, right? If I'm using a camera, if I'm making a cinematic, I'll be doing all of this on the camera, right? So I can control the post-process of each camera individually in each sequence individually. Okay, so keep that in mind. This is designed for a game environment where every camera that's in play is going to be impacted by the post-process volume, right? The reason I make that distinction is if I pump up a lot of the values in the post-process volume, it's going to slow down my editing process when I use Unreal, as opposed to when I render out a video using Movie Render Cube. Okay, so if you pump up a lot of these values and get really high fidelity using the post-process volume, you're going to start running into maybe some GPU issues, right? Just be aware of that. So here's my scene. What was I going to do?
Last time.
Yeah.
You had to be inside of it for it, like.
Yes, so that's why I did the infinite extents unbound.
Oh, I see,
So
okay,
if I check that box, it means the post-process will extend infinite.
that's good.
infinite.
Okay.
So I want to add some lens flare. Let's increase that intensity, right? So like now we can start to see even more lens flare. Where's my sun? Right, so there's some lens flare, right? You can play around with that. I can change the size of my bokeh, right? That looks weird, right? But remember we talked a little bit about bokeh, which is a sort of the pixie light effect, right? And so one thing that can add a lot of drama to your scene is I wonder if I need to, let's go to edit, project setting. Okay, yeah, so we're okay. So I think I need to do something here. Go into our exponential height fog. I think it's an element here. Right? So we want to go into our exponential height fog, which is something we added in the beginning. And I want to check this box, volumetric fog. theory, this is all I should need to do. And let's see if I can get some Jesus rays going. So I'm gonna hit Control L.
Have to. And it's like shot of light.
Yeah.
So it has to do with like the height of the fog.
Um, maybe. Where is my fog? Here's my fog actor. Well, I mean, it also has to just do with the contrast of light. It might be better if I get rid of my clouds. Uh, Maybe I just need some darker materials here. Um, I'm just gonna make a black material. All right, I might just send you guys a tutorial on this later. Because there's some boxes that need to get checked and then it's like a fairly straightforward process, but I'm just trying to kill time while this is going through. It's almost done. Um, like shafts. 5.
Or it's under directional light vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if
It's the light felt they work.
you can see your
Yeah,
light shafts.
yeah,
Okay.
played around with the contrast a lot, so I can barely see it, but yes.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, light shaft bloom. Um, so yeah, so with a volumetric exponential height fog with the volumetric checked, and in your directional light, turn on light shaft bloom. And then you could kind of increase and decrease the bloom. right? And play around with it. And then you can change the tint of the bloom. Get some moodiness, right? And so now if we hit play, oh, I gotta go, right? So,
There's such a low. Well.
I don't know if you've seen this picture.
Yeah. I in the old, it's,
Yeah,
yeah, oh,
right. So this is a famous picture of Grand Central Station. The reason why this happened was because people smoked so much back then that the atmosphere, like the light shot has nothing to do with the light itself. It has the atmosphere that gets lit up, right? And that sort of makes the shaft visible. So all this to say is, in order to get light shafts, you need the exponential height fog. You need to set the height fog to be volumetric, right? So again, um, calling it a volumetric fog, checking that box, and then making the directional light, right, and giving it light shaft so that we can see the bloom. Remember, bloom is just a result of the atmosphere, right? So in Unreal, you're just simulating the effect of the atmosphere by increasing the value of bloom, right? Okay.
Carill, Carill. Cari.
Oh my
Oh,
goodness. Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. I think, did you download the zipped one that I sent? And you still can't open it? I'll send you maybe another link. And you can try it after the fact. I think it makes more sense to just go over in whatever time we have. And then you can sort of follow along for your own purposes, right? I just want to show you a technique of using materials. For the most part, you'll probably just be downloading Megascan's materials and applying them to your scene. But yeah, unfortunately, we've spent a lot of time trying to make this work and it's not working. So just to look at where we were, right? So the hell with it. Now I've got like files all over the place. Um
Super.
I bet they are, but I said, you feel that,
Yes.
you wanna learn how to English, it's single line. Got a job out there, so.
I don't know.
Chérie, que se passe-t-il?
so like I said, wherever your films are at, like I just want you to like find a particular shot and work towards refining that, right? If you can make one shot look really, really good, you can essentially repeat that step for the other shots, right? So for next week and really for the end of the class, if you just develop one shot, I think that's more than enough. And then just splice that into your cut, into your final cinematic, and then that is sufficient for your submission, right? If you want to keep going and develop more scenes, that's 100% okay. But at a minimum, I care more about the quality of one than like filling the entire thing, right? Because we're just learning the workflow. Once you know how to make something look really good, you can make the other things look really good. And you could spend, trust me, a lot of time doing that too, right? And so it's really important that you establish goals, you establish, you know, what needs to be improved and why, right? And so the scene that I'm selecting to improve is basically this shot here, right? Where I'm gonna just kind of pan across, right? You could see like the picnic blanket, and then panning across this roof garden, right? And it's kind of spliced into a couple of different parts. Um, like this part here, right? Right now the model is very empty. And so you may need to add some assets like in this scene here, and then the husband walks into the house, right? Um, I was able to find, so this is where I would start modeling, right? Or adding things to the model as needed. Or finding assets online, 3D assets that you could use, right? I was able to find a slightly better version of the Villa Savoie where some of these interiors were already modeled out. But it's not that much better, right? And so if you can find a higher quality asset at that point, you could swap it in. And so if we go into my Unreal project now, it's the slightly better version, right? But I still don't like the materials here. Oh dear. All right, this is where we go to different scalability, right? So, you know, it doesn't look good, but we're gonna make it better. We're gonna improve it everywhere we can. The thing you always want to do is either have like a list or a checklist or sketches of what you actually want to accomplish. Where's my pure ref? Right, so I'm going to open my reference and I want to see just what I need to do, right? So like here, I want this table, I want to have some objects on this table. So now I have an idea of what the texture of the table is like. Here I can kind of get a sense of the conditions of the architecture itself, right? I can get some idea of detail, right? There's some concrete tile, there's like grass kind of growing in between the tile, right? There's a very thin metal frame, there's color in here, there's a chair. If I look over here, right, there's a radiator, some radiators, like it's, you know, it's in a light fixture, right? Fortunately, the model has some of the furniture and built-ins included, but not all of the elements, right? So I need to find some of these things. So I'm giving myself like a to-do list of what do I need to add to my scene to start improving upon it, right? And then just building up that one scene. And you'll see it could take a long time to build up the one scene, which is why I'm totally fine with you guys focusing on that, right? So the first thing I want to do is, you know, I had some cylinders standing in for like plates and wine glasses and cups and things like that for the purposes of my initial cinematic, but I'm going to replace all of that with new assets, right? I have this floor mesh that I don't like, and I want to use the Easy Mapper plugin to put to get a nice concrete tile and then start putting grass in between the tile and just like really improving the appearance of that particular asset. And so I'm going to start there, right? Um, so I'll send you some of these things to use as well, but where do I start? Um, the so in Unreal, similar to when we were making the planet. The denser the mesh is, the more information Unreal is going to have to like manipulate the geometry using the world displacement functionality, right? So the first thing I need to do is take this floor mesh and I need to export it out, right? Because there's just not enough polygons on the surface to work the way I want it to. So one thing I could do is just export it as an FBX from my Rhino model, right? So I can just go in here, highlight the floor mesh, go to File, Export Selected, and then I'm gonna export this out as a FBX file, right? And I could just put it in on my C drive. I'll just call this garden floor. Sure. Right? And then this is where I'm gonna have to just bring it into a different platform. Hit OK and export it. So here I'm using 3ds Max. You could use Blender, you could use Maya, but you all have 3D access to 3ds Max. The reason I'm doing that is because 3ds Max models in meshes, right? It just knows the language of meshes. And what I'm gonna do is import that FBX into 3ds Max. I don't know if right. Right. So this is after I've already made the mesh dense, right? So whatever asset you bring into 3ds Max, let's see if I can just grab. I'm just going to drag it in to show you the before and after. Worked. Right. So here's the mesh before, right? So you can see there's like massive triangles, right? So I don't have enough vertices. And so what I needed to do is just to go into my modifier, right? And then go to subdivide, right? And I can change this to whatever dimension I want. And I think for that one, I did 3 inches or 6 inches. I can't remember. So if I type 3 inches here, right? So this was 6 inches. This is a 3-inch dense mesh.
Can the subdivide meshes in Rhino too?
If you know how to do it, you can definitely use that. And so whatever technique you use to subdivide the mesh, you just need to have enough vertices, and vertices are just the points of intersection, right? So if I select on this and I highlight, whoops. Here, I'll just select on this and highlight vertex, right? All these little dots are my vertices. And so the technique that the way that Easy Mapper blends materials is through a process called vertex painting. So we just need vertices to then paint in order to make that work. And then I could save this as an FBX, bring it into Unreal, and just replace the mesh that I want to do this for. And this for things that are highly visible, right? So if I look, uh-oh, there we go, right? Um, right? So this floor is going to be highly visible in this scene. This planter is going to be highly visible in this scene, right? So I just want to make sure that I'm identifying the things that I really need to work on. Like this table is going to be highly visible in this scene. The architecture here is going to be highly visible in this scene, right? And so between the footage that I'm using and the reference images, I want to just add the requisite level of detail to make it work. So I'm going to close this just because I think there's just too much going on right now. I'm going to close this and then go back. And open this back up. And hopefully I'll maybe change the setting to even the medium. So hopefully I don't crash again. So I'm just going to go back to my one pane layout. I'll change it to medium for now. Okay, here we go. Okay. So this floor mesh I brought in as a separate asset. So my architecture folder in Savoir, I just brought in this garden floor mesh, right? This is the one that I exported from 3ds Max. And then I deleted the one that I had from my original model and just replaced it. So I have that asset that has a lot more information, right? I have here this folder called Easy Mapper. You guys can migrate this over to your projects if you want to use it, right? And in Easy Mapper, you'll have a series of materials that you can use, a bunch of master materials, and some instances that they created, right? And so the other thing we'll need are the textures that we'll want to use for our concrete tile, right? And so in the so in that 2025 folder, which I'll send again, we have a couple of different concrete tile textures that I downloaded that you could use as well, right? And so we have concrete tiles and concrete tiles too. You can like take and pick and choose which one you want. And so we're going to use these textures using some of these demo material instances, right? And so let's just apply any one of these here, I'm gonna duplicate this. And I'm just gonna call this concrete tile. Right, so here is my concrete tile material. I'm gonna shrink this a little bit. And so I want so the way Easy Mapper works is you have material A, you have material B, and you have material C, which means you could layer in 3 different textures. C is the highest level, B is the next highest level, and A is the lowest level. So your base texture should be A. So if you have brick and you want to add gunk to it, brick would be your layer A, the gunk would be your layer B, and then something else is your layers, right? If you wanted to add that many layers, right? And so I want to make my layer A then have my concrete tile texture, right? So I'm gonna go to my concrete tile. I don't know which is better. I just grab this one. I'm gonna drop this in, and I need my normal map, right? And then remember we saw like the ORM layer. It was like 3 maps in one, right? So I don't have 3 maps in one. This defaults to having what are called ARD textures, which is the same thing. A is for ambient occlusion, R is for roughness, and D is for displacement. If you don't have that type of map, you just uncheck this box, and then it'll give you these other channels, right? And so I need to add my ambient occlusion texture. So that's AO. So I'm just going to move this over. My displacement. Where is my displacement? I guess maybe the other one had better displacement. Right. So maybe I'll use this concrete. I'll use concrete tile, the second one instead, because this one has a displacement map. So there's base color. Here's ambient occlusion. Here's my bump map, which I'm not using. Cavity, I'm not using. Displacement, I'm putting here. My normal is here. And then my roughness is here. Okay. And then my layer B, right? If I go back, we don't quite see it here, but I'm just trying to fill the in-between space here with some grass and some moss and whatever, right? And so now I need those textures. And so I think I have downloaded right, there's some mossy ground here. Maybe this will work. So I'll just see if I can get away with this, right? So I'm gonna have no height information on this one. And I'm just gonna use the moss and the normal map here. Right, and in fact, I might just clear this out. Right, so now I have layer A and layer B. And so I'm gonna dock this up here. So this is my concrete texture. So now in my scene, I can find that material that I just created. Right, the concrete. Is this where it was?
No, second.
Is this it? Yes, thank you. And I'm just gonna drag that in.
I'm gonna save it in the material tab. Like,
Oh, you mean hit save?
Yeah.
It's okay. The material instances are a little bit better about updating in real time.
They update themselves.
The material, yeah. So if you closed it, it'll just kind of auto save. But it's good practice to hit save, obviously. So here is my concrete texture. And you can start to see that I'm getting some displacement here, right? If I want, I can go into my settings, right? Just so we can see. So a couple of things is we want the use displacement to be checked because we want to use displacement. We want to be able to use vertex blending. So I want that to be checked. So vertex blending is the painting that's going to allow me to mix between the two different materials. And then this is going to, we'll deal with this later. These allow me to control the level of blending that's happening between the layers, right? And then we also want to activate the adjustments for layer A, at least layer A and layer B for now, right? And so in my layer A, I can scroll down here and look at my displacement intensity, and I can start like bumping it up. And it starts taking that displacement map and making the effects of it much more pronounced, right? But I don't want to go too far with it. So let's just set it to 0.3. Maybe that's even too much. And this is just based on your eye, what you think looks appropriate or not, right? So I'm going to dock this again. The way we start painting vertices, one thing to note is when you displace a material, it's actually going to go up from its original location, right? So remember, we're playing with the Z height, and so it might pull itself up past where you want it to, in which case you may have to physically lower your material down. Obviously, you don't want to go too far down, right? So just keep that in mind as well. All right, so with my mesh selected, I'm going to go into my modeling tab, right? And I want to go to the attributes. And this is where we paint our vertex colors, right? So if I click on this, my mesh is only showing the vertex colors now, right? And it's all defaulting to white. I want to fill, so white is everything, right? It's red 100%, blue 100%, green 100%, right? And so I want it to default to 0 because I want to paint the finishes on top. So I'm going to hit fill black. For some reason, that does not seem to be filling black. And then in my material mode under visualization, I want to set this to original material. I think my graphics card is just really struggling through this, unfortunately.
Because it's longer.
I don't think so, but it might be. You know what? Maybe you're right. Oh, you know what? It is because it's not showing me. So I'm going to hit accept. Let's raise this back up. And then paint vertex color. Right. So let's yeah, so it's black. I think you're right. I think because when you're painting, it goes back to the flattened material. So at that point, maybe I was not visualizing the material correctly. And so I want to see what I'm painting, right? And the most important thing to note is one, we need to set our paint colors. So when we're painting something, we want to set it to white. White is 1, right? And when we're erasing something, we want to set that to black, and black is 0, right? So it's like on or off. It's a binary condition, right? And we want to only paint on the channel that's in question, right? So the R channel is material B. And the green channel is material C. That's kind of important to know, right? And then we can change our brush size. I'm going to shrink my brush size down. I'm going to decrease my fall off because in this case, I'm really only just dealing with these seams. So I want to make this as small as I can. So let's try 0.002. Right. And I actually want to adjust something real quick. So I'm going to hit accept. Right. If I look at my reference images, my tile is actually a lot bigger than I'm showing, right? So I want to adjust that too. So let's go back into our map because this is going to affect how I paint it. So I want to make sure I've adjusted my scale of material, right? So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And then I have texture offset and texture scale. I'm really just going to, I'll set these back to 1, right? And I'm just going to do a global scale, right? So I can adjust this global scale, and I'm going to adjust this down until I get something that looks close to that scale, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? There should be about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 6 tiles across the glass if I, count the tile 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So I'm just trying to match my reference image. And so now I can go in and I want to paint these vertices again. I'm still in modeling mode, right? And with my red channel on, I can come here and start painting green, right? Right. It's kind of, it's brute force right now, right? But we'll fix that in a bit, right? So I'm just going to paint a corner of this, right? And then very important, you have to hit the accept button. Otherwise, if you switch out of modeling mode, it's going to erase everything that you did. Okay, so I'm going to hit accept, and now it's going to displace it. And so, right, like it's doing some weird things, right? We're not obviously happy with this, but this is maybe the first step towards like making it look right, right? But we have a lot of control over how these things displace relative to one another, right? So first and foremost, what I might do with my material B is change my displacement intensity and lower that quite a bit. And maybe like really close to 0, if not 0 itself, right? Because I don't really have a displacement map for this, right? So now I'm like sort of sunk into my cement tile layer. And so in my cement tile layer, actually not in my cement tile layer, I'm gonna go into the general settings again and adjust my A and B controls here. And so this is okay at 0.1. This is okay at roughly 10, right? So let's just set this to 10. And then I can start using this to limit my blending into the seams, right? And so I can like reduce it and be very subtle, or I can just be much more intense with it, right? And this is also still looking kind of weird. So I might increase, I could either increase the height of my grass layer, the green layer, or decrease the height of my concrete layer. So maybe I'll go into my A material, go to displacement intensity, and just lower this even further. Right? And what that does is it increases the influence of the green. So then I have to come back up here and fiddle with this a little bit more again. Right? right? Something like that, right? You can just kind of play around with what looks good, right? And then at that point, I might also go into my foliage mode and just pick some foliage, right? So like I've got some little grass shoots, right? Well, that's too big. Let me see if I can find something smaller. Here's some weed. So I want to make sure that I'm only placing things one at a time. Otherwise, I'm literally, right, like plastering things, um, like painting, like we were painting grass and other foliage, right? So we want to be very subtle with this, right? And so we want to exercise coloring. So this is going to look a lot better when it's not at me, but you get the idea, right? The other thing that I want to do is I used, where is the front of the house? Right, I used a bunch of decals, right, for the front of the house, right? So let's get out of foliage mode, right? And so we can start to see we have some different decal materials. I'm going to click on this to browse to where those are located. So I've got some dirt and rust and leakage. And so I can start applying decals to sort of roughen up this wall a bit, right? So the decals are under visual effects. I can drag a decal actor into my scene, right? I'm going to shrink this. Let's do 10 by 10 by 10, right? And you can see, like I said, whatever the decal intersects with is going to stamp that material onto it, right? So if I drag my leakage, so with my decal selected, it's got no material. So if I drag the decal material onto this, I can start rotating. And then moving this into position. Right, and I'm just going to kind of show you the effect. Right, so I can just start kind of adding gunk. And I want to just be very precise about how I apply it, right? Like I just want to make sure it's going to be more or less subtle, and it's going to not overdo it in my scene, right? And so I can start changing the opacity of this, right? So opacity intensity, I can just reduce this. So it's just a much more subtle effect, right? And then obviously I can start adding other assets around, apply better glass and things like that. And we're sort of out of time. So in the maps is this version of the scene that has all of those things done. So I'll just show you what I did to the scene, which is basically just using the vertex painting and then adding a bunch of decals, putting some additional foliage into the scene, and then adding some materials as well. So let's let this load, and then adding like a wine bottle that I found on one of the fab assets, right? These are all decals. Let me, right? I think this is probably going to crash, but let's try to go to high. Right. So here I just added a material to this, added some foliage in here. There's just foliage on the ground. There's just, these are more weeds that were added, right? This is the green that was painted onto the concrete. This is a decal that I made for lichen, right? It's just like a masked material. So to look at that, I just I just did a Google search for lichen and made it a transparency, turned that into a texture that I applied on the Megascans decal material, and then just moved them around where I needed to, right? And the thing that I want to emphasize is you should always make sure that you're looking at your level sequence workings, right? And so uh-oh. Yeah, there he goes. Right. So as you're working, just look through the camera that you're using, because there's no point adding detail where it's not going to be used, right? And so when I send this file, you'll see all it is there's decals on the walls that make it dirtier. I added the metal grate, right? That was an asset that I found on Fab. And again, just using the reference images to get a sense of like what that space should look like, right? So either have a sketch or just like an idea or reference images that you're trying to match to gain that level of the right amount of realism. Because if you just keep going, you could go forever, right? So just give yourself a target, and once you achieve that target, then you're done, right? And so like, you know, reflectivity, dirt and stains, plantings, you could tackle it in a lot of different ways, but this example will show you how to go from a very blank scene into something that's a little bit more populated. Okay, let's see if this all right. Okay, yeah, it's a bit of a disaster day, unfortunately, but I'll send you, like, all I did was follow that the easy mapper tutorial, right? That the scene has weather. So I don't know if you noticed, I made the concrete look wet. So in that tutorial, it'll also show you how to add puddles on it. And then in that file is the ultra dynamic sky, which I think I showed you a little bit earlier and talked about like how you could change the sunlight and add weather. And so I added rain using that asset. And so I'll just send you a few links to how to manipulate those. But in that project, which hopefully you'll all be able to download and open soon, you'll have a folder called Ultra Dynamic Sky. You'll have a folder called Easy Mapper that you can then migrate into your projects if you want to be able to. Okay, but like I said, just make sure you have an objective, right? Pick one scene and just like really bring out that scene, right? For not even next week, but also for the final, right? And if you want, you could do more than one scene, but I really am okay with you guys focusing.
That's good.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You too.